Certified case files. Genuine evidence. Objective truth. You are viewing Bodycam incident reports.
Stand up. What are you doing here?
I'm sitting in a public park sketching.
You fit a narcotics lookout description. Show ID. Now.
You have no reasonable suspicion.
Stand up or you're detained.
Officer Brock Higgins had spent 6 years with the Savannah Police Department carving out a reputation not for excellence but for a specific volatile brand of aggressive mediocrity. His personnel file was a heavy, mournful thing thick with 22 formal complaints filed by citizens who had the misfortune of crossing his path. Yet the department's leadership viewed these not as red flags but as bureaucratic hurdles. The pattern was etched in stone across those 22 complaints. 18 of them involved Higgins targeting African American men in historic districts or high-end commercial zones for no reason other than their presence. A tourist taking photos of architecture accused of casing businesses. A university professor waiting for an Uber accused of soliciting narcotics. A grandfather walking his granddaughter to school accused of kidnapping. Each complaint triggered a mechanism of denial. Higgins would be pulled from patrol for 3 days, sent to a seminar in a windowless room, given a certificate of completion, and returned to the streets with his badge polished and his biases reinforced. One humid Tuesday in October, in the heart of Savannah's moss-draped historic district, Higgins's inability to comprehend that a black man in a linen suit might belong on a park bench collided with a force of legal nature that superseded his local authority by orders of magnitude. That collision would end Higgins's career with a suddenness that left him gasping cost the city of Savannah $608,000 and ripped the veil off a department that preferred filing training certificates over removing toxic officers. The Honorable Julian Thorne, age 56, sat on a wrought iron bench in Chippewa Square. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the heavy, wet heat typical of the Georgia coast. He was not eating chips. He was not exercising. Julian was engaging in his only true vice sketching. A charcoal pencil in his right hand, a thick sketch pad on his knee, he was meticulously capturing the play of light on the bronze statue of General Oglethorpe. Julian was a man of immense, terrifying intellect. Born in the deepest poverty of rural Georgia, he had clawed his way to Yale Law School, clerked for the Supreme Court, and had been appointed to the federal bench for the Southern District of Georgia 15 years ago. He was known in the legal community as the Monolith. He rarely raised his voice. He never smiled on the bench. His rulings were bulletproof 80-page dissections of constitutional law that appellate courts rarely dared to overturn. On this Tuesday, the court was in recess. Julian had exchanged his black robe for a cream-colored linen suit, a Panama hat, and polished loafers. He looked like exactly what he was, a distinguished gentleman enjoying the city he served. But to Officer Brock Higgins, cruising past in his patrol car looking through a lens clouded by 6 years of unchecked prejudice, Julian Thorne did not look like a federal judge. He looked like a target. Before we go any further, I want to ask you, where are you listening from today? If you believe that truth needs to be documented and shared, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. It helps us continue to expose these stories and bring accountability to the surface. Savannah, Georgia, a city of ghosts and gardens where history is layered in the cobblestones. Chippewa Square is a tourist haven surrounded by theaters and cafes. It is neutral ground. It belongs to everyone. At 2:45 p.m., the square was quiet. A few tourists wandered with cameras. A trolley tour rumbled in the distance. Julian Thorne was in a state of flow, his hand moving with practiced grace across the paper. He was armed only with a stick of compressed charcoal. His federal credentials and his badge, a gold shield that commanded the respect of every federal agency in the country, were tucked inside his breast pocket. He was completely within his rights. He was creating art. Higgins parked his cruiser illegally in a loading zone and watched Julian for 2 minutes. In Higgins's mind, the logic formed instantly, bypassing all training and reason. Black man, expensive suit, sitting alone for too long, not looking at a phone. must be a lookout, must be coordinating a drop, high-level drug distribution. It was a fantasy constructed entirely of bias, yet to Higgins it felt like detective work. He didn't see a federal judge. He saw a suspect who needed to be dominated. Do you think an officer's gut feeling should ever override the Constitution? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Higgins exited the vehicle. He didn't walk. He prowled. He adjusted his belt, checked the seating of his weapon, and approached with that specific rolling gait of a man looking for a fight. Julian saw him coming. Julian observed everything. He saw the tension in the officer's shoulders, the lack of a smile, the direct predatory stare. Julian didn't stop sketching. He simply shifted his mental state from artist to jurist. He prepared his mind as if he were entering his courtroom. "Hey, you, what's in the book?" No greeting, no good afternoon, just a demand. Julian paused, lifting the charcoal pencil from the paper. He turned his head, slowly peering over his spectacles. His voice was a rich, deep baritone, the voice that had sentenced cartel leaders and corrupt politicians. "It is a sketchpad, officer, and I am capturing the light on the statue before the clouds shift." Higgins didn't like the voice. It was too educated, too calm. It didn't sound like fear. And to Officer Higgins, a lack of fear was a sign of guilt. "I didn't ask about the light. I asked what you're doing here. We've had reports of loitering and commercial soliciting in the square." "I am sure you have," Julian said, turning back to his drawing. "However, sitting on a public bench in a public square is not loitering. Loitering requires an intent to commit a crime or a failure to disperse upon a lawful order where a breach of peace is imminent. I am doing neither. As for soliciting, unless you wish to purchase this drawing for a very high price, I am not selling anything." The sarcasm flew over Higgins's head, but the defiance landed squarely in his ego. "Stand up, put the book down." "No." The word hung in the humid air, simple, flat, absolute. "Excuse me?" Higgins stepped closer, his hand drifting to his taser. "I said no," Julian repeated, not looking up. "You have no reasonable suspicion to detain me. You have articulated no crime. This is a consensual encounter, and I do not consent to stopping my leisure to indulge your boredom. Unless you can cite the specific penal code I am violating, I suggest you return to your vehicle." This was the moment. The moment where 22 previous complaints should have triggered a memory. The moment where the de-escalation level 4 certificate in Higgins's file should have mattered. But training certificates are just paper if the heart of the officer is corrupted by arrogance. "I'm detaining you for investigation of narcotics activity. You fit the description." Julian finally laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. The description of a 56-year-old man in a bespoke linen suit drawing a statue, which narcotics kingpin operates with a charcoal pencil in broad daylight. "Stand up, I want ID." "I am not providing identification. Under Hebel v. 6th Judicial District Court of Nevada, I am only required to identify myself if there is reasonable suspicion of a crime. You have none. You are fishing. And you are fishing in shark-infested waters, young man," Higgins snapped. "That's it. You're under arrest for obstruction." "Obstruction of what? You cannot obstruct a vacuum. You have no lawful duty to perform here, therefore there is nothing to obstruct." Higgins lunged. He grabbed Julian's arm, the arm holding the charcoal. The sketchbook fell to the ground, landing in the dirt. The charcoal shattered. Julian Thorne did not fight back physically. He knew that physical resistance gave them the excuse they needed to use force. He went still, his body rigid, his eyes locking onto Higgins's face with a terrifying intensity. "Get on the ground, stop resisting!" Higgins screamed, performing for the imaginary audience, creating a narrative of danger where none existed. "I am standing still," Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "I am memorizing your face. I am memorizing your badge number, 4292, and I'm calculating the precise amount of punitive damages this municipality is about to pay." Higgins kicked Julian's legs apart, forcing him to his knees in the dirt. He jammed a knee into Julian's lower back. He wrenched Julian's arms behind him, applying the handcuffs with unnecessary brutal force. The steel bit into Julian's wrists. "You want to talk lawyer crap now?" Higgins panted, adrenaline flooding his system. "You can tell it to the judge." "I am the judge," Julian said. Higgins paused. The handcuffs clicked shut. "What?" "I said, Julian spoke clearly. His face pressed against the gritty pavement of the square. "I am the judge. My name is Julian Thorne. I sit on the United States District Court for the Southern District of Georgia. My credentials are in my left breast pocket. If you reach for them, do so with extreme care, as my federal identification is property of the United States government." Higgins froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He looked down at the man he had just thrown into the dirt. The linen suit was ruined. The expensive hat lay crushed. But the voice hadn't cracked. Higgins reached into the pocket. His fingers brushed the leather wallet. He pulled it out and flipped it open. The gold badge gleamed in the afternoon sun. Department of Justice, United States District Judge. The photo ID confirmed it. The face in the photo was the face in the dirt. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the frantic beating of Officer Higgins's heart. He had not just arrested a lawyer. He hadn't just arrested a politician. He had arrested a federal judge. A man who held the power of life and imprisonment over the region. A second patrol car screeched to a halt at the curb. Sergeant Elena Vance jumped out. She had been monitoring the radio hearing Higgins escalate a suspicious person call into an arrest in under 3 minutes. She knew Higgins. She knew the pattern. She had signed off on his last 3 training certificates, hoping they would be enough. She saw the man on the ground. She saw the suit. She saw Higgins holding a federal badge like it was a live grenade. "Higgins!" Vance screamed, sprinting across the grass. "What have you done?" He wouldn't show ID, Sarge. He was resisting. Vance reached them. She looked at the ID in Higgins's hand. Her blood ran cold. She recognized the name. She had testified in Judge Thorne's courtroom 6 months ago regarding a wiretap warrant. She knew him as a man of absolute rigor and terrifying fairness. And now he was handcuffed in the dirt. "Get him up," Vance whispered, her voice trembling. "Get him up right now. Uncuff him. Oh my God." He was loitering. Higgins stammered, his reality crumbling. "Unlock the cuffs, you idiot." Vance shoved Higgins aside and knelt down. "Judge Thorne, Your Honor, I am so sorry. I am Sergeant Vance. Please let me help you." Higgins undid the cuffs with shaking hands. Julian Thorne stood up. He did not brush the dirt off his knees. He did not fix his jacket. He wanted the dirt to remain. It was evidence. He adjusted his glasses, which had miraculously survived, and looked at Higgins. "Officer 492, Julian said. "You have just provided me with a masterclass in why qualified immunity is under such scrutiny. You detained me without cause. You used excessive force on a compliant subject. You destroyed my property." He gestured to the ruined sketchbook. "And you did it all because you could not conceive that a man looking like me could be a peaceful participant in this society." I thought you were a lookout," Higgins mumbled. "Based on what evidence?" Julian demanded. The volume didn't rise, but the pressure did. "Based on the color of my skin and the location of my body. That is not police work. That is prejudice wrapped in a uniform." Julian turned to Sergeant Vance. "Sergeant, I want a photographer here immediately to document my injuries and the state of my clothing. I want this officer's body camera footage secured and uploaded to a cloud server where it cannot be accidentally corrupted. And I want the chief of police here within 10 minutes. "Yes, Your Honor. Immediately, Your Honor." The aftermath was not a quiet administrative matter. It was a demolition. News of the arrest of a federal judge in a public park by a beat cop with a history of profiling broke before the sun went down. The legal community of Georgia erupted. The chief judge of the circuit court issued a blistering statement. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division didn't just open an inquiry, they practically set up a field office in the Savannah Police Headquarters. Julian Thorne filed his lawsuit 30 days later. He did not settle quickly. He wanted the discovery process. He wanted the files. When the personnel records of Officer Brock Higgins were subpoenaed, the contents were damning. 22 complaints, 18 for racial profiling, and the remedy for each training. Complaint 4. Stopped a black dentist walking to his car. Remedial action 4-hour course on community relations. Complaint 12. Detained a black college student studying on a bench. Remedial Action One-Day Seminar on Implicit Bias. Complaint 19. Harassed a black city councilman at a parade. Remedial Action Online Module on Verbal De-Escalation. The department had built a paper shield of certificates hiding a predator behind the guise of continuous education. They had documented the cancer and treated it with aspirin. In the deposition, Julian Thorne sat across from the city attorney. He was not the plaintiff. He was the prosecutor of a system. "You see, Counselor," Julian said, pointing to the stack of training certificates, "this is not proof of your diligence. This is proof of your negligence. You knew he was biased. You knew he was incapable of distinguishing between a citizen and a criminal based on anything other than melanin. And yet every time he proved it to you, you gave him a diploma and a gun. You did not train him. You enabled him." The settlement was finalized 14 months later. $6,800,000. It was the largest police misconduct payout in the city's history. But the money was secondary to the terms Judge Thorne demanded and received. Officer Brock Higgins was terminated the day after the incident. But the settlement required more. It required a complete restructuring of the department's disciplinary matrix. No more endless training loops. A 3 strikes policy for bias-related complaints was implemented. If an officer received 3 sustained complaints regarding profiling or bias, termination was automatic and mandatory. Furthermore, the settlement established an independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power, chaired by a retired judge, a position Julian ensured would have teeth. Officer Higgins didn't just lose his job, he lost his anonymity. His name was added to the National Decertification Database. He would never carry a badge again. He moved back to his hometown in Alabama, telling people he was a victim of political correctness gone mad, never grasping that he was actually a casualty of his own refusal to see humanity in others. Julian Thorne returned to the bench. He used a portion of the settlement money to establish a legal defense fund for indigent citizens who had been victims of police misconduct but lacked the credentials to make the officers stop. He returned to Chippewa Square 6 months later. He sat on the same bench. He wore a new linen suit. He opened a new sketchbook. He drew the statue of Oglethorpe. Occasionally, police cars would drive by. They would slow down. The officers would look at the man on the bench. They saw the suit. They saw the skin. But they also saw the memory of a $6.8 million check and a career destroyed in an afternoon. And they kept driving. The lesson here is stark and uncomfortable. We often trust that systems are self-correcting. We trust that if an officer does wrong, they are retrained and they learn. But this story exposes the lie of compliance theater. Training without consequences is not accountability. It is permission. It is a way for institutions to say, "We tried," while allowing the behavior to continue. Brock Higgins didn't fail because he wasn't trained. He failed because he didn't care to learn. And the department failed because they valued the appearance of action over the reality of justice. It took a federal judge, someone with the ultimate armor of privilege and authority, to break the cycle. But what happens to the man who isn't a judge? What happens to the student, the tourist, the father who can't cite Hebel vers Nevada? They are the ones who pay the price for a system that archives complaints instead of acting on them. We must demand that training is not used as a shield to protect bad actors. We must demand that a pattern of behavior is treated as a choice, not a mistake. What do you think needs to change in how we handle repeat offenders in law enforcement? Should there be a national 3 strikes law for police misconduct? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if you believe in true accountability, please hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. We are building a community that demands better.
Case officially closed. For more authentic law enforcement footage, please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for joining Bodycam Incident Reports.